Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux, and in this video I want to give you guys my top 10 tips for using the Adaptalux Studio. Now when you get some new equipment there's always a little bit of a learning curve, and we try and soften that learning curve with our video demos and tutorials right here on the channel. However, in those short videos there's not a lot of time to go into the nuances of a system like this, so I want to dedicate an entire video to just picking out some of the smaller things that you might not know and tips to get you guys started when you first get the system. I'm going to get started with tip number 1, so I'll see you in just a sec. My very first tip is going to be about lighting arms and how they bend into position. When they come out of the box, they're going to be straight like this, and your first instinct is going to be to bend them and play around with them, and that's a good instinct. You're going to figure out quite quickly the nature of the arms and how the gooseneck bends around and how it stays in position. However, one thing that I do see people doing quite a lot is plugging the arm straight into the control pod and using the arm pointed out straight like this, just trying to point it like a torch or a flashlight. You definitely don't want to do that. You do want to try and make use of this flexibility. That's what the system is all about. And you don't want to leave your arm completely straight and try and just bend it right at the end. You'll get a little bit of a spring back as it reaches its maximum tension there. So try and use the full length of the arm to find the position of the head of the lighting arm. As you get used to moving your arms around, you'll definitely figure out the nature of the arms and find a nice way to put them into the positions that you want. It's just a little bit of a learning curve, so I definitely recommend playing around with your arms as soon as they're out of the box and just learning how they like to sit and move. Tip number 2 is going to be all about boost mode. It's a way to get more power out of your lighting arms and better settings on your camera. It can be toggled on and off by holding the dial on the top of the control pod, but now we can also do that in the app. This little toggle in the top right hand corner of the app, when you're connected to the control pod, will now toggle boost mode. It's a really handy way to just juice up your lighting arms and get a little bit of extra power out of them. You can see that both of these arms are still on 50%. Toggling boost mode on and off doesn't actually mess with the values of each lighting arm. So you can set one of them at let's say 4% for this arm and then 70% for the other one. Toggle on boost mode and you're still going to have that same ratio of 4% to 70%. You can toggle that on as much as you like. So when you're not shooting, you might want to lower your lighting a little bit if you're trying to preserve your battery, and then when you're ready to shoot, hit that boost mode toggle and you're going to get much better settings. So while we're in the Adaptalux app, we can talk about how to represent colors in this interface so that you can remember which arms are which. Now, as you can see, I plugged in 4 arms here and they're all set at their default 50% brightness. I can select them and adjust them as I like. However, we're not seeing the colors on here that we've got on the arms. We've got a red and a blue lighting arm plugged into these 2 bottom ports. I can actually remind myself that this is a blue arm by double tapping on the interface here and then selecting the color of arm. Now this doesn't change the colors in the pod itself, it's just for your own memory, but it will help you remember that we've got 2 white arms plugged in at the top, a blue in the bottom right port and a red in the center. I'm sure that most of you already know that there is a built-in battery inside the control pod that can be recharged via USB at the back here. You can also leave it plugged into the mains while it's still working if you want to work in a studio environment. But one thing that you might not realize is that if you're going out in the field and you do need a little bit of extra charge, you can also charge the pod using a phone battery bank. So this is just plugged in to this phone battery bank and you can see that the pod is nicely charging away there with its flashing red light. This is a really handy little thing to have in your camera bag anyway, but if you do know that you're going to be out using your Adaptalux for a particularly long time and you want a little bit of a backup charge, you can take one of these with you and charge freely from that, even while you're still using it for your photography. The next thing that I want to talk to you guys about is keeping your control pod and your lighting arms clean. Now, you don't need to worry about the exteriors all that much. It's pretty weatherproof, and if you get a bit of mud on them, it's not going to make a difference. But where it will make a difference is inside these ports. If you get all gunk and dirt and debris inside those ports where the connections are, you're going to get an unreliable connection when you plug your lighting arms in. That can manifest in the arm just not turning on, or perhaps a little bit of flicker when you're settling your arms into place. But it's also a really easy fix. If you've got dust or dirt or an obstruction, all you need to do is just look into your ports before you start your shoot and just give everything a little bit of a clean. You can do this just with your finger, or if you've got a lot of grime in there, use a little cotton bud and just give those magnets a little whiz around, and they should stay nice and clean, and you won't have to worry about any dirt. For my next tip, I want to talk about using a macro light source as a macro light source. Now, what I mean by that is thinking about the scale of your subject, the scale of your lighting, and the distances between them all. Most photographers will be aware of the inverse square law that dictates that further away you move your lighting, the less light is going to fall on the subject, and then the less light will be reflected into the camera. Basically, the further away your lighting, the less strong it's going to be, the less light and the worse settings you're going to get in your camera. Now, with the Adaptalux Studio, we have these tiny little light sources that are designed to get as close as they possibly can. So this huge distance that we've got between my red diffuser here and my coin is actually not doing us any favors. It's not putting most of that light onto my subject. Moving it much closer to my subject is going to instantly put a lot more light into my photograph, simply because it's closer to my subject and therefore closer to the camera. Being conscious of this, being conscious of being able to move your lights in this close is something that you'll have to get used to, because with larger light sources, you're used to having them all the way across the room, but with something this small, you can have them sat just outside of the frame and use the maximum amount of power from your light source for getting the best settings. Now, I know that some of you guys are going to be sat at home thinking, why did he add all of that colour to that lovely shot of the coin? He ruined it by adding too much. And I don't disagree, there's definitely such thing as too much colour, but there's also such thing as being afraid of using coloured light. I've added two nice diffused white lights here. My shot's looking a lot more conventional, but just by experimenting with a little bit of coloured light, I can make this look a lot more interesting. So I've got my red light plugged in here as well. It's currently turned off, but if I just start adding 1 or 2% at a time, a little bit of red into my shot, you can see that things are starting to change and they're starting to pop, starting to be a little bit more eye-catching without going overboard. So my tip is to not be afraid of experimenting with a little bit of color. You don't always have to go overboard and add all of the colors all of the time. Sometimes a little subtle hint can work wonders. I'm just moving my coin out of the way for a moment because my next tip is going to be about the tripod that I've got sat here. Now, with 3 lighting arms plugged in, it's pretty stable, but only a little tip and it's going to start to topple over. That's because I've not counterbalanced my lighting arms. They're all out here at the front and it's pulling the center of gravity all the way out here. It wants to pull down at the weight of the arms. Now, there's a few things that we can do to counter that just by thinking about counterbalancing the weight of the arms when you mount your pod. The first thing, and probably the most obvious, is going to be to place those lighting arms over the top of a tripod leg. So everything is in line here, and that's going to give it a lot of extra stability underneath that center of gravity. You can't pull this down, it's not going to tip over anymore because there's a leg in the way. The next thing that we can do, perhaps you've got a subject down here and you don't want to do that, you can actually tilt the pod upwards. That's going to move that center of gravity back towards the pod and it's not going to be as unstable. You can then use your lighting arms and the length of the arms to bring your light back down onto your subject. Finally, with these mini tripods, you can move the legs around and flatten them down as well. So screwing this little bit here, we can flatten those legs down, and this is going to give the tripod a much wider base and a lot more stability, not tempting the pod to topple over the front. My next tip is going to be about controlling our light, and by controlling our light I don't mean the controls of the pod or the controls of the app. Those are pretty straightforward. I mean taking control of our light and making it fall only where we want it. So the first way to do that is obviously to move your lights around and make sure that they're placed in the right position, but we also have a method that not too many people know about to narrow down your beam angle and make sure that light isn't spreading parts of your image that you don't want it to be in. Now the easiest way to demonstrate that is actually without a subject in the frame, so that you can see this big circle of light. This is where the light from my red lighting arm is actually falling. On the end of each lighting arm is a screwable piece with a little magnet on it so that we can attach filters and diffusers really easily. But this piece unscrews, and as we unscrew it, it actually narrows down the beam angle. So I've just done a few screws there, and you can see that that circle is now much smaller. If I keep going, we can really narrow this down to a very tight spotlight. And if you have a subject here, you can then start to place that spotlight exactly where you want it to be. If you keep screwing so that the piece actually comes off the end, there it goes, you now have the widest possible beam angle. Now, so if you really want to push your light to have the maximum amount of width in your image, you can just take these bits off, and they do just screw back on nice and easily, and then you can play around with that beam angle control to really finely tune exactly where your light is falling within your image. My final tip for you today is all about lighting from multiple directions. Now, when you've got a nice small macro subject, you can do that nice and easily using the Control Pod 3. You've got a small subject here, you can bring different lighting arms around from different directions. But what happens if your subject is perhaps a little bit bigger, or maybe see-through, so you want to bring a light in from a completely different direction? Well, for that, we now have the Control Pod Mini. So this is a tiny little miniature version of the Control Pod, and you can use this in tandem with other lighting arms to really take control of the direction of your light. Now, it might be tempting to try and do all of this with much larger lights, but these small macro lights are perfect for hiding behind subjects. So this Pod Mini, for instance, you can have your subject and you can bring it behind, backlight your image while hiding all of this somewhere in the undergrowth, maybe. Obviously, probably not with a diffuser, but you can shine light through subjects and nicely, stealthily place your lights within the scene itself. Now, being able to do that is a real unique selling point of the new Adaptalux Pod Mini, which is currently available on Kickstarter. I'll put a link to that down in the description and up in the top right hand corner of your screen now. Check that out. It's really great for using multiple minis in the same shot, or using in tandem with the full Adaptalux Studio Pod setup. So that brings us to the end of my top 10 tips for using the Adaptalux Studio, and I'm pretty sure most of this is common knowledge and common sense. When you get your hands on the arms, you'll know how to bend them. It's pretty easy to figure out. Obviously, cleaning your equipment is always important, and counterbalancing those arms will be quite obvious when your tripod starts to tip over when you put 3, 4, 5 arms into a pod. But I just wanted to put all of this stuff out there because it's not something that I usually mention in my larger tutorials, because not everybody is trying to deal with adding lots of arms or shooting from behind. So let me know what you think to my tips down in the comment section, and if you've got any tips of your own, make sure to leave those as well. Hit the like button while you're down there, as well as the subscribe button for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration coming in the future. For now, that's all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.